Nathaniel Crowe pulled his rifle from the saddle sheath the moment he saw the dresses. Not a hesitation. Not a pause. His hand moved before his mind caught up. 12 years of dangerous work had burned that reflex into him so deep it was practically breathing. His horse stopped. His eyes locked on the clothesline strung between the old oak and the porch post of his house on his land, and every muscle in his body went rigid. Women's dresses. 3 of them. Swaying in the Montana wind like they had every right in the world to be there. Someone was living on the Crowe Ranch. Someone who had no idea what was about to happen to them. If you're watching this right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one is going to take everything you've got. Nathaniel had not come back to Montana to feel anything. He had come back to sign papers. That was the entire plan. Ride to the Crowe Ranch, confirm the property was standing, ride to Billings in the morning, sign whatever the land attorney put in front of him. Take whatever Garrett Voss or any other buyer was willing to offer and ride out of Montana territory for the last time in his life. Clean. Final. Done. He had not come back to feel the way his chest tightened when the familiar shape of the valley appeared on the horizon. He had not come back to notice the way the late afternoon light hit the hills, the same way it always had, the same gold and shadow that had been the backdrop of every childhood memory he had spent 12 years trying to bury. He had not come back to feel anything at all about this land, or this house, or the 3 graves behind the farmhouse that held every person he had ever loved. He had come back to finish something. And now there were dresses on his clothesline, and a thread of smoke rising from the chimney that was supposed to be cold and dead, and the fence that should have been rotted to splinters was standing straight and tight, and Nathaniel Crowe sat on his horse with his rifle in his hand, and felt something he had not felt in 12 years. He felt like he was being ambushed on his own property. He walked the horse forward slowly, his eyes moving across the land, the way they moved across every unfamiliar situation, reading, cataloging, looking for the threat. The north fence line was repaired. Not professional work, but solid. The posts were set deep, and the wire ran clean and taut the entire length of the property edge. The barn roof had been patched. The kitchen garden on the east side was planted and tended late-season crops, still holding on in the dry September air. 14 steps from the porch, he stopped the horse. The front door opened. She came out without hurrying. A big woman, broad through the shoulders, full-figured, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had heard him coming from 50 yards out and had already decided exactly what to do about it. A dish towel in her hands, a faded blue dress, an apron with a stained pocket. She looked at him the way a woman looks at something she has been expecting for a long time. She was not afraid of the rifle. That was the first thing that registered. "Evening," she said. Nathaniel lowered the rifle slowly. Not because she had asked him to. Because a woman who came out onto a porch with a dish towel instead of running for cover was not a woman who needed a rifle pointed at her. "This is Crowe Ranch," he said. His voice came out harder than he intended. "I'm Nathaniel Crowe." "I know," she said. "Then you know this is my land." "I do." "And you're living on it." "I am." He waited for more. An apology. An explanation. A negotiation. Some kind of scrambling. She just stood there with those steady dark eyes and looked at him like he was the one who needed to explain himself. "What's your name?" he said finally. "Amelia Brooks." No decoration, no softening, just the name stated clean and plain. "I've been here 14 months. 14 months. While he was in Nevada, settling a cattle dispute for a rancher who paid him $300 and a bottle of rye. While he was telling himself this land meant nothing to him anymore. While this woman he had never met was repairing his fences and planting his garden and sleeping under his roof. "You broke into my house," he said. "The door wasn't locked." She paused. "It was barely on its hinges. I fixed the hinges for what it's worth." Something about the way she said it. Not defensive, not sorry. Just stating facts made him feel wrong-footed. And Nathaniel Crowe did not like feeling wrong-footed. He dismounted, tied his horse to the post at the end of the fence, the post she had repaired, and walked to the base of the porch steps. "Miss Brooks," he said, keeping his voice even. I don't know your circumstances. I'm not going to ask, but I've come back to sell this property. I need you gone before I can do that, and I'd appreciate you making arrangements to leave within the week." She looked at him for a long moment. "Come inside," she said. He blinked. "Pardon. You've been riding all day." She turned toward the door. "You look like you haven't eaten since before dawn. Come inside. Eat something, and we can talk about all of this in the morning when you're not making decisions on an empty stomach." "Miss Brooks, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand it fine." She paused in the doorway and looked back at him over her shoulder, completely calm. "You understand it better on a full stomach. Come inside." She disappeared through the door. Nathaniel stood at the base of those steps for a full 5 seconds. Then he went inside. The house smelled like bread and wood smoke, and something savory from the back of the stove, and underneath all of it, the faint smell of linseed oil on wood that had been dried out and cracking when he left it. She had treated the floors. She had fixed the hinges. She had kept fires going in the stove long enough that the walls themselves had lost that particular smell of abandonment, that damp, closed-up, forgotten smell that he had been bracing himself for since the Nevada state line. He sat at the kitchen table. His family's table still there, still solid, still the same table where his mother had served breakfast every morning of his childhood before the money ran out and everything changed. She put a bowl of stew in front of him and sat down across the table with her own bowl, not waiting on him, eating dinner. He looked at her. "You're not going to apologize." "For what?" "For being here." "No," she said simply. "I'm not." He ate. The stew was good, genuinely good, the kind of food that came from knowing what you were doing, from caring about the result. He was hungry enough that almost anything would have tasted fine, but this was something else. This was skill. "How long have you been doing this alone?" he asked. "Since I got here." "Where'd you come from?" "Kansas, originally." She broke her bread without looking at it. "I moved around a lot before here. Cooking mostly. Some laundry work. Wherever there was something to do." She paused. "I came through Red Hollow in the spring of '88. I was looking for work. There wasn't any. So you moved on to private property instead." She looked up at him. "Someone in town mentioned this place had been sitting empty for years. I came to look. A beat. I stayed." Just like that. Not just like that. Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge now, something underneath the calm that he recognized as the sound of a person who has been misunderstood enough times to be tired of it. "The roof was leaking in 3 places when I got here. The north fence was completely down. The kitchen garden was overgrown past recognizing." She held his gaze. "I stayed because leaving would have felt like giving up on something worth saving." He looked at her. "The townspeople," he said, "in Red Hollow, they know you're out here." Something moved across her face. Not pain exactly, something more settled than pain. "They know," she said. And she was quiet for a moment. "I went into town twice in the first month. The man at the dry goods store told me I was wasting everyone's time. That a woman of my—" She paused briefly, choosing her words the way a careful person chooses their footing. "Of my size and my station, had no business working a ranch property. He said I'd be gone within a month, and I should save myself the embarrassment." She looked down at her bowl. "The second time, there was a group of women outside the milliner's. One of them laughed when she saw me. Said something to the others and they all laughed. The kitchen was very quiet. I didn't go back to town for 4 months, she said. I made do with what I had." "And after 4 months?" Nathaniel asked. "After 4 months, I stopped waiting for anyone to decide I was allowed to be here." She looked up at him. "I just kept working." Nathaniel set down his spoon. He had spent 12 years working alongside people who gave up. The moment the situation got uncomfortable. Men who talked big over whiskey and disappeared when the actual difficulty arrived. He had built a career out of being the man who did not disappear, who stayed and did the difficult thing, because that was what the job required. He was looking at someone who had done the same thing. With no pay, no protection, and no one telling her she was allowed to. "You've been feeding people," he said. The pot on the stove was large enough for 8 portions at minimum. Ranch hands mostly, travelers sometimes. There's not much between Red Hollow and the Pemberton spread to the north. She glanced at the stove. I started leaving the gate open at mealtimes. People paid what they could. And when they couldn't pay, then they ate anyway, she said. They were hungry. He looked at her across the table, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about the spring." Her eyes sharpened, just slightly. "What spring, Miss Brooks?" He kept his voice level. "You are an intelligent woman. You have been living alone on this property for 14 months, without anyone finding reason to force you off it. You have been careful, you have been observant, and you have survived things that would have sent most people running." He paused. "You know exactly what spring I'm talking about because you found it, and you've been using it, and you have not told a single person in Red Hollow that it exists. So I would appreciate it if you didn't pretend otherwise." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not capitulation, but a decision. The look of a person who has been keeping a secret, not out of dishonesty, but out of survival, and who has just determined that the person across from them has earned the truth. "Northeast quarter of the property," she said. "Underground mostly. It surfaces about 40 yards from the fence line. I found it 8 months in when I was trying to figure out why the soil in that corner stayed damp after a dry week." She paused. "I've been using it carefully. Small amounts. Enough to keep the garden through the dry stretch last summer without drawing it down." "And you didn't tell anyone?" "No." "Why not?" She was quiet for just a beat longer than usual. "Because I had a feeling," she said slowly, "that someone would find a reason to take the water if they knew it was there." Nathaniel pushed back from the table. I went to the window, stood there with his back to her, looking out at the dark, and felt the cold clarity of something slotting into place. The kind of clarity that came at the end of a long problem, when all the scattered pieces suddenly showed you the shape of what you were actually dealing with. "Garrett Voss," he said. Behind him, Amelia said nothing. "He's been wanting this land," Nathaniel said. "Not for the buildings, not for the fields, for the water." He turned around. "He came to the property." "Once," she said. "About 3 months ago. He stood at the fence and looked at the land for a long time. He didn't come through the gate. He looked at the northeast corner." "The longest?" she said quietly. "And then a land attorney in Billings sent me a letter." Nathaniel said more to himself than to her, telling me that if I didn't appear in person to settle the property title within 60 days, the territory would absorb the land. He looked at her. "That letter didn't come from a concerned attorney. It came because Voss needed me back here. He needed me to see this place the way I expected to find it, abandoned, ruined, worthless, so I'd be willing to sell for whatever number he offered without asking too many questions." Amelia held his gaze. "That's my understanding," she said. "But instead he found you here," Nathaniel said. "A woman who had turned the place into something, who had found the spring, who had been careful enough not to tell anyone about it." He looked at her steadily. "You've been protecting this land from him." "I didn't know who he was until he came to the fence," she said. "But yes. Without any legal right to do so." "Without any legal right," she agreed. "Yes." Nathaniel stood in this kitchen of his dead family's house and felt something he had not felt in years. Not sentiment. He had burned sentiment out of himself a long time ago, and he had no interest in retrieving it. What he felt was simpler and more dangerous than sentiment. He felt responsible. "I'm not selling," he said. The words came out flat and certain and final, the way a door sounds when it closes against a strong wind. Amelia did not smile, did not reach for his hand, did not say anything warm or encouraging or sentimental. She simply looked at him with those steady dark eyes and said, "Then we need to figure out how to prove the spring belongs to this property before Garrett Voss decides to make things more complicated." "He'll make them more complicated regardless," Nathaniel said. "Men like Voss don't accept a simple no. Then we'd better start now." She stood and began clearing the bowls with the same efficient economy she brought to everything. "Your father kept the property records. I found the box in the back of the bedroom closet 14 months ago. I haven't touched it." He stared at her. "You found the property records?" "They weren't mine to touch," she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment. A woman who had lived inside his family's house for over a year, who had repaired it, maintained it, kept it alive, and had left a box of private family documents untouched in a closet because they did not belong to her. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "why did you really stay here?" She turned to face him. The lamplight was behind her. Her voice was quiet and certain and carried none of the hesitation of someone who wasn't sure of themselves. "Because I know what it feels like to be given up on," she said. "Too big, too plain, too poor, too ordinary to be worth believing in. That's what I've been told my whole life." She paused. "I came here and found something that people had also given up on. A house, a piece of land, a spring that nobody knew was there." Her eyes held his. "I wasn't going to give up on it. I never planned to." Nathaniel was very still. "Show me the property records," he said. She nodded and led him to the back bedroom, and he followed her through the house that his mother had kept and his father had nearly destroyed, and this woman had saved without anyone asking her to, and she pulled the box from the closet undisturbed exactly where his father had left it, and they carried it to the kitchen table together. They sat for 3 hours. She showed him everything. Not just the property records, her own notes kept in a neat, precise hand cataloging 14 months of observation. Every person who had stopped at the gate to eat. Every conversation about the surrounding land. Every time she had seen Garrett Voss's men on the road outside the property line. Every detail she had stored away with the methodical patience of someone who understood that attention was its own kind of armor. Nathaniel read every word. "You could have kept this to yourself," he said, finally looking up at her. "If I came back and sold to Voss, you'd lose the property regardless. But if I came back and refused to sell, at least there's a chance you might stay." He paused. "Sharing this with me helps me most of all." "I know," she said. "So why?" "Because it's your land," she said. "You had a right to know what was being done to it." She met his eyes. "And because the truth helps everyone eventually, even when it's slow about it." He thought about that. He thought about 12 years of working for people who never told him the whole truth about anything, who kept information back for leverage, who treated honesty like a weakness. "I'll need a few days in town before I ride to Billings," he said. "Things I want to look into." "All right. I'll sleep in the barn." "You'll sleep in your brother's room," she said firmly, already moving toward the hallway. "The barn is cold, the room is clean, and the bed is made. Don't be stubborn about it." "You're not worried about propriety." She stopped and looked back at him, and there was something in her expression that was not quite humor, but was in the same neighborhood. "Mr. Crowe," she said, "I have been living alone on property. I have no legal right to feeding ranch hands at a communal table and ignoring the opinions of people who think my size is the most important thing about me. I ran out of energy for propriety a long time ago." He looked at her. "Good night, Miss Brooks," he said. "Good night, Mr. Crowe," she said, and went to her room. He went to Thomas's room. The bed was made with a quilt he didn't recognize. She had made it herself or traded for it somewhere. Either way, it was there and it was clean, and it smelled of cedar and the dry Montana air. He lay down in his dead brother's bed and looked at the ceiling in the dark and thought about a woman who had looked at a broken, forgotten piece of land and seen something worth fighting for. I thought about what that said about her. He thought longer than he intended about what it said about him, that he had left it for 12 years without a backward glance, and a stranger had walked in and decided it mattered. Outside, somewhere in the dark of the northeast quarter, the spring ran on quiet and steady and completely unaware that a man named Garrett Voss had already decided it belonged to him. He was wrong about that. He was about to find out just how wrong. Nathaniel was up before the sun. Not because he had slept well, he hadn't. He had lain in Thomas's bed for what felt like most of the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him, the way old houses did in the cold hours before dawn, and thinking about a box of property records and a woman who had left them untouched for 14 months because they weren't hers. How was dressed and at the kitchen table with the property box open in front of him by the time the first gray light came through the window. He heard her the moment she woke up. The quiet sounds of someone moving through a house with consideration for others. not the careless noise of a person who lived alone and had forgotten anyone else existed. Careful footsteps, the soft close of the bedroom door, water being drawn from the indoor pump without letting the handle bang. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at him, sitting at her table with his father's papers spread across it, and did not say good morning or ask how he had slept, or make any of the small social sounds that people made when they were trying to establish comfortable footing. She went to the stove and started the fire. "You find anything useful?" she asked her back to him, her voice still carrying the rough edge of early morning. "More than I expected," Nathaniel said. She turned around and looked at him properly. "Tell me." He spread 3 pages across the table and pointed. "My father filed a water rights claim on this property in 1871. He did it through a land registrar in Billings properly legally with witnesses. The claim covers the spring and all surface water originating on or beneath the northeast quarter." He paused. "The claim was never challenged, which means it's still valid." Amelia came to the table. She leaned over and read the pages herself, not taking his word for it, and he respected that. "Garrett Voss doesn't know about this document," she said. "He can't," Nathaniel said. "If he knew the water rights were properly registered, he wouldn't be trying to buy the land cheap. He'd have already found a legal mechanism to contest the claim directly." He sat back. "He thinks the spring is unclaimed. He thinks he can acquire the property, file his own water rights claim after the fact, and nobody will be in a position to argue." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "So the moment you told him you weren't selling, he'll look for another way in," Nathaniel said. "And he'll move fast because he knows I'm here now and I've started asking questions." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The coffee she had put on was already beginning to smell like it was ready, and neither of them moved to get it. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Days," Nathaniel said. "Maybe less." She looked at him steadily across the table. "Then you need to go into Red Hollow today." That was already the plan. "You need to understand something before you walk in there," she said. "Garrett Voss doesn't just own land in this valley. He owns the men who talk about land. The assayer, 2 of the 3 men on the county land board, the lawyer that most ranchers use when they have a dispute." She paused. "I've been listening at my kitchen table for 14 months. People talk when they think nobody important is hearing them." Nathaniel looked at her. "You've been gathering intelligence," he said. "I've been listening," she said simply. "Because I knew the day would come when someone would try to take this place, and I wanted to understand who I was dealing with before that happened." The coffee was ready. She got up and poured 2 cups and put one in front of him, and he took it without comment, and they sat across from each other in the early morning quiet, and she told him everything she knew about Garrett Voss. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, Nathaniel understood that the situation was considerably more complicated than he had walked into the night before, and considerably less hopeless than Voss probably assumed it was. "The land board meeting," he said. "When is the next one?" 4 days from now, Amelia said. "First Thursday of the month every month at the Red Hollow Courthouse." She paused. "Voss attends every one. He's been pushing through a land consolidation measure that would allow adjacent property owners to file claim on abandoned land with a simplified process." Nathaniel was very still. "Define simplified." "Less documentation required. Shorter waiting period. And the definition of abandoned includes any property where the registered owner hasn't been physically present for more than 5 years." The number landed between them like something heavy. "I've been gone 12, Nathaniel said quietly. "Yes," Amelia said. He picked up his coffee cup and set it back down without drinking from it. "He's been preparing this for a long time. Since at least last winter," she said. "That's when the talk started at the table. Ranch hands don't always know they're carrying information. They just talk." She met his eyes. "I wrote it all down." "I know," he said. "I read it." He stood up, picked up his hat from the chair beside him, and turned it once in his hands the way a man did when he was running through a problem. "I need to be at that land board meeting," he said. "You need to be there with the water rights document," she said. "And any other documentation that proves consistent ownership and active use of the property." He looked at her. "Active use? You mean, I mean 14 months of records showing this land has been farmed, maintained, and operated as a working property. She reached across the table and pulled her own notebook from beneath the edge of the property box where she had slid it last night. I have it all. Dates, yields, names of every person who came to eat at this table, repairs made, seed purchased. She put the notebook in front of him. Active use. Nathaniel looked at the notebook. Then he looked at her. "Miss Brooks," he said slowly, "did you know when you started keeping these records that something like this might happen?" She was quiet for a moment. "I knew that somebody someday would come and tell me I had no right to be here," she said. "I didn't know if it would be you or Garrett Voss, or the county sheriff, or some banker with a foreclosure notice. I didn't know what form it would take." She paused. "But I knew the only thing that would matter in that moment was proof. Not my word. Proof." He picked up his hat and put it on. "I'm going into Red Hollow," he said. "I know. Don't open the gate today," he said. "Don't let anyone onto the property who doesn't say my name first." She nodded once. He rode out. Red Hollow in the morning was exactly what he remembered, the particular combination of industry and smallness that characterized every town this size in the territory. Everyone moving with purpose, and everyone knowing everyone else's business, and a layer of unspoken hierarchy underneath all of it that was more rigid than anything you'd find in a city, precisely because there was nowhere to escape it. He felt eyes on him before he had gone 20 yards down the main street. He rode to the land registrar's office first. The man behind the counter, a thin, fussy individual named Aldrich, according to the nameplate, looked up when Nathaniel walked in and immediately had the expression of someone who recognized trouble without being able to identify exactly what form it was taking. "I need to file a notice of active ownership," Nathaniel said. He put the water rights document on the counter. "Crowe Ranch, Northeast Quarter water rights claim filed 1871 by Harold Crowe. I'm Nathaniel Crowe, registered heir. I'm filing notice that the property is under active management and the water rights claim is being maintained by the registered owner." Aldrich looked at the document, looked at Nathaniel, looked at the document again. "Mr. Crowe," he said carefully, "I don't believe there's been any active presence on that property for some years." "There has been for 14 months, Nathaniel said. "I have documentation of active agricultural use, ongoing maintenance, and continuous habitation going back to July of 1888. He laid Amelia's notebook on the counter beside the water rights document. "I would like you to formally log my notice of active ownership today with today's date and provide me with a stamped copy." Aldrich looked at the notebook. His expression shifted in a way that told Nathaniel everything he needed to know. The man had already been spoken to about this property, probably more than once. "I'll need to review the documentation," Aldrich said. "Then review it," Nathaniel said. "I'll wait." He waited for 45 minutes. Aldrich reviewed every page of the notebook with the painful slowness of a man who was hoping the situation would resolve itself if he moved slowly enough. It did not resolve itself. Nathaniel sat in the wooden chair against the wall and watched him and said nothing. Finally, Aldrich stamped the notice and pushed the copy across the counter without meeting Nathaniel's eyes. "Filed," he said. "Thank you," Nathaniel said, and picked up both documents and walked out. He had been on the boardwalk for approximately 30 seconds when he heard his name. Crowe. The voice came from across the street. A big man well dressed by the standards of the territory, with the kind of bearing that came from years of being the most powerful person in any room he walked into. He was standing outside the Red Hollow Bank with two men flanking him who were not his business partners and were not his friends. They were the kind of men who stood next to powerful men for a reason that had nothing to do with friendship. Garrett Voss crossed the street like a man who had never in his life considered that a street might not want to be crossed by him. "Heard you were back," Voss said. He was smiling. It was the kind of smile that did not involve his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you at the registrar's office this early in the morning." "Didn't expect to be here this early," Nathaniel said. "Things came up." Voss's smile held. "I imagine they did." He looked at the documents in Nathaniel's hand, not obviously, but deliberately, the way a man looked at something he wanted you to know he'd noticed. "I hope you found the property in reasonable condition." Abandoned land in this territory doesn't hold up well. The property isn't abandoned, Nathaniel said. A pause. Small, controlled, but there. Is that so? Voss said. Active agricultural operation for the past 14 months, Nathaniel said. Fully documented. Water rights claim from 1871, registered and uncontested. He held the stamped notice so the seal was visible. Just filed notice of active ownership with your friend Mr. Aldrich. Something moved behind Voss's eyes. It was not panic, men, like Voss did not panic. It was recalculation, fast and cold and invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. I think there may be some confusion, Voss said pleasantly. There's been a woman squatting on that property. No legal standing, no documentation. She has documentation, Nathaniel said. 14 months of it. And she was operating the property under my authority. That was not technically true yet. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Under your authority, he repeated slowly. Under my authority, Nathaniel said. Another pause. The two men flanking Voss had gone very still in the way that men like that went still when a conversation shifted into territory they might be needed for. Nathaniel was aware of them, the way he was always aware of that kind of presence completely and without showing it. Well, Voss said finally, I suppose we'll have a great deal to discuss at the land board meeting Thursday. I'll be there, Nathaniel said. I look forward to it. Voss tipped his hat, a gesture so practiced it had become a reflex, and turned and walked back across the street. Nathaniel watched him go. Then he heard the laughter. It came from the group of women gathered outside the dry goods store to his left. 3 of them well dressed in the particular way of women who were wives of successful men in a small town, which meant they had nothing but status to protect, and all the time in the world to protect it. They were not laughing at him. They were not even looking at him. They were looking at a woman who had just come out of the dry goods store with a small basket and was making her way down the boardwalk with the quiet economy of someone trying to conduct their business without drawing attention. Amelia. She had come into town. He had told her to stay at the property. He watched her move down the boardwalk with her head straight and her jaw set and her basket against her arm, and he watched the women's laughter follow her like something thrown, and he watched Amelia not flinch, not slow down, not give them a single thing to work with. He crossed the street. Miss Brooks, he said. She turned. Something flickered in her eyes when she saw him, not surprise, not relief, just acknowledgement. Mr. Crowe, I thought we agreed you'd stay at the property today. We discussed it, she said. We didn't agree. She shifted the basket. I needed salt, and I needed flour, and I need to look a man in the face in this town without apologizing for myself. So I came. He looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, he could hear the women's conversation resuming lower now, that particular kind of lowering that meant the words were more pointed, not less. He did not turn around. Did you get your salt? He asked. And my flour, she said. Then walk with me, he said. There are some things I need to tell you about what happened at the registrar's office, and I'd rather not stand in the middle of the street to do it. She fell into step beside him without hesitation, and they walked down the boardwalk together, and Nathaniel was aware in the particular way that a man who had spent his life reading rooms became aware of things that every eye on the main street of Red Hollow had just found them and locked on. Let them look. They found a bench outside the feed store at the far end of the street, removed enough from the main traffic that they could speak without being easily heard. He told her about Aldrich, about the stamped notice, about Voss. When he got to the part about telling Voss she had been operating the property under his authority, she was quiet for a moment. That wasn't true when you said it, she said. No, he agreed. It is now. He looked at her directly. I'm making it retroactive. You were managing the property on my behalf for 14 months. I'm authorizing that formally in writing today. It changes your legal standing, and it changes what Voss can argue at the land board meeting. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. It complicates things for you. Miss Brooks, he said, a man sent me a fraudulent letter to get me back here so he could steal water that belongs to my family's property from under a woman who has been protecting it for over a year. Things are already complicated. He paused. I'm going to find a lawyer today, a real one, not one of Voss's. And I'm going to draw up a formal property management agreement backdated to when you arrived. You'll sign it, and I'll sign it, and it will be filed with the county before that land board meeting Thursday." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. The real question underneath it. "Because you deserve the protection," he said, "and because you've earned it." She looked away from him down the street, and he could see her working through something, not doubt about him, but the particular kind of difficulty a person had when they were offered something they had spent a long time believing they would never receive. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he said. They sat for a moment in the thin autumn sunlight. Then she said, "Voss is going to come to the property." "I know. He's going to come before the meeting. He's going to try to find a reason, an incident, a complaint, something he can bring to the board as evidence that the situation is unstable." She paused. "He'll try to use me as the reason. A woman with no legal standing living on private property, it's the easiest argument he has." "It won't be easy after today," Nathaniel said. "No," she said, "but he'll find another angle. Men like that always do." She looked at him. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked at her sidelong. "What makes you think I'm not telling you something?" "Because you've been thinking about it since we left the feed store," she said simply. "You get a particular look when there's something you haven't said yet. Your jaw does something." He almost smiled. "My jaw." "Your jaw," she confirmed. He turned to face her. "Aldrich's reaction when I put the notebook on the counter," he said. He recognized it. Not the notebook specifically, but what it represented. He already knew about the property records, about the management documentation, about the water rights claim. He paused. "Someone told him to expect pushback from me." Amelia went very still. He was briefed. "Before I walked in," Nathaniel said, "which means Voss knew I was at the registrar's office before I had been there 10 minutes, which means he has someone watching." She absorbed that. "In the registrar's office. Or between the office and the street," he said. "Either way, nothing we do in this town in the next 4 days is going to stay private. He'll know our moves before we make them." The silence between them had a particular quality. Now, not fear, but the kind of focus that came when a situation clarified itself into its essential shape. "Then we need to make moves he won't expect," she said. "That's exactly what we need to do," he said, "starting with who we talk to." She looked at him. "You have someone in mind?" "I need someone on the land board who isn't in Voss's pocket," he said. "You've been listening at your kitchen table for 14 months. Is there anyone?" She thought about it. Took her time. He waited. "Chester Hale," she said finally. "He's the third member of the board. Voss has the other two, but Chester, a ranch hand named Dupree, ate at the table twice last spring. He worked the Hale property. He said Chester Hale turned down 3 separate offers from Voss to sell his ranch over the past 4 years. She paused. "A man who says no to Garrett Voss 3 times is a man who means it." Nathaniel thought about that. Where does Chester Hale stand on the consolidation measure? "Dupree said he voted against it the first 2 times it came up," she said. "He was outvoted both times. The measure has been tabled pending the next meeting." "Where it'll be brought up again," Nathaniel said. "Where Voss will push for a final vote," she said. "With your property as the primary test case for the new process." He stood up from the bench and looked down at her. "Can you write a note to Chester Hale? Something that would get him to agree to a private meeting before Thursday." She looked up at him. "Why would my note carry more weight than yours?" "Because Dupree told you about him," Nathaniel said. "Which means Chester Hale has men who eat at your table. Which means he already knows who you are, even if you've never met." She thought about that for a moment. "Give me paper," she said. He pulled his small field notebook from his coat pocket and handed it to her with the pencil. She wrote the note in under 2 minutes, tore the page, carefully folded it, and handed it back to him. He read it. It was exactly right. Direct, specific, referencing Dupree by name, in a way that established she was real and her information was real, and asking for a meeting at a time and place that put Chester Hale in the position of choosing whether to help or to do nothing. Not manipulative. just honest and clear and intelligent. "You're good at this," he said. "I've been practicing," she said dryly, and stood up. "I need to get back to the property before the noon meal. There are 3 men who'll come by expecting to eat, and I'm not going to send them away hungry because Garrett Voss has decided to make my life difficult." "I'll ride back with you," he said. "You need to find Chester Hale," she said. "Chester Hale can wait an hour," Nathaniel said in a tone that closed the discussion, and she looked at him with something that was not quite surprise, but was in the same territory. They rode back together, and he left her at the gate and went to find Chester Hale, and he found him at the livery stable on the south edge of Red Hollow. A heavy-set man in his 60s, with the kind of face that had been outdoors for 4 decades and showed every year of it, and the kind of eyes that had watched too many people try too many things and had learned to see through most of them. Nathaniel handed him the note. Chester read it, read it again, looked up. "You're Nathaniel Crowe," he said. "I am." "Harold Crowe's boy?" "Yes, sir." Chester looked at the note again. "This woman, Amelia Brooks, she's the one who's been feeding Dupree and the others." "She is. Dupree says she's the best cook in the territory," Chester said. "He's not a man who gives compliments easily." He folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket. "Come to my ranch tomorrow morning at 7. Bring the documents you filed today with Aldrich. Don't look surprised. Word travels fast in this town, and I'll tell you what I know about what Garrett Voss is planning for Thursday." Nathaniel nodded. "I'll be there." "Bring Miss Brooks," Chester said. Nathaniel paused. "Pardon, bring her," Chester said simply. "A woman who feeds men without asking what they can pay, and who keeps property records for a place she doesn't legally own, is a woman I want to hear from directly." He looked at Nathaniel steadily. "I've been on that land board for 11 years. I know what honest looks like. I want to see if she's it." Nathaniel rode back to the Crowe Ranch in the late afternoon with the stamped notice of ownership in one pocket and Chester Hale's agreement in the other. And when he came through the gate, Amelia was at the fence on the north side, checking the wire with her hands in the methodical way she did everything. She looked up when she heard the horse. He pulled up and looked down at her. "Chester Hale wants to meet tomorrow morning at 7, he said. She straightened. "What did he say?" "He wants to hear from you directly," Nathaniel said. "He wants to know if you're honest." Something moved across her face. It was a complicated expression, not pride, not quite, but something in the same direction, mixed with the particular weariness of a person who had spent a long time being assessed for the wrong things. "He wants to know if I'm honest," she repeated. "That's what he said." She looked at him for a moment. "What did you tell him?" Nathaniel looked back at her steadily. "I told him to judge for himself," he said. She held his gaze. Then she nodded once and went back to checking the wire. He unsaddled his horse and turned it into the paddock and went inside, and the house smelled like bread again. Always bread. Always that warm, solid smell that said, someone had decided this was a place worth feeding people, and he sat at the kitchen table and spread the documents out in front of him and began preparing for Thursday. He worked until dark. When she came in from outside, she looked at what he had laid out on the table, the documents organized into a sequence, the key points annotated in his tight, careful handwriting. The water rights claim placed at the front, where a land board would see it first, and she looked at all of it without saying a word. Then she went to the stove and started the evening meal, and after a few minutes, she said quietly without turning around, "My father used to say that a man who prepares like he means to win usually does." Nathaniel kept writing. "Your father was right," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He was right about a lot of things. He just didn't live long enough to see most of them through." He looked up at her back. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said. "He'd have liked you." A pause. "He didn't like men who gave up easily." Nathaniel looked at the documents in front of him at 12 years of absence and the cost of it laid out in legal paper, and thought about a father who had built a water rights claim in 1871 and died before it mattered, and a woman's father who had been right about things he never saw through, and about the particular cruelty of all the things that happened to people who deserved better. "We're going to win this," he said. She turned from the stove and looked at him across the kitchen. Her expression was not hopeful. It was something steadier than hope, something that had been tested enough times that it did not need to perform itself. "Yes," she said simply. "We are." Outside, the Montana night came down cold and clear over the Crowe Ranch, and somewhere in Red Hollow Garrett Voss was making plans that he believed were already decided. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. Chester Hale's ranch was 7 miles north of Red Hollow, and Nathaniel and Amelia rode there in the cold Wednesday morning without talking much. That was something he had noticed about her in the 2 days since he had arrived. She did not fill silence the way most people did. She did not talk to manage her nerves, or to establish her presence, or to make sure the other person knew she was there. She was simply there fully and without apology, and the silence between them had the quality of something comfortable rather than something avoided. He was not used to that. He had spent 12 years around people who talked constantly, usually about themselves, usually about what they wanted or what they feared or what they intended to do about both. Silence made most people uncomfortable. It made Nathaniel comfortable, and he had not expected to find another person who felt the same way. Chester Hale met them at the gate himself. How was a big man as Nathaniel had registered the day before, but what registered more clearly in the morning light was the steadiness of him. The way he moved and stood and looked at them both as they dismounted had the quality of a man who had made all his important decisions a long time ago and was at peace with them. He looked at Amelia for a long moment. "Miss Brooks," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Dupree told me you fed him 2 full meals and wouldn't take a cent the second time because he'd already paid once and the food hadn't run out." "He looked hungry," she said simply. Chester Hale nodded once, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected, and turned toward the house. "Come inside," he said. "We don't have much time, and I have a great deal to tell you." What Chester Hale told them over the next hour changed the shape of everything. Garrett Voss had not been preparing for weeks. He had been preparing for 2 years. The land consolidation measure, the one Chester had voted against twice, was not a general policy proposal. It had been written specifically with legal language precise enough to be intentional to apply to exactly 2 properties in the county. The Crowe Ranch was one. An elderly widow named Clara Putnam owned the other, a small homestead on the western edge of the valley that sat directly above a secondary water table that connected underground to the same source as the Crowe Spring. "He doesn't just want your water," Chester said, looking at Nathaniel across the table. "He wants both sources. Combined, they'd supply enough water to irrigate 3 times the acreage he currently holds. He'd have the most productive land in eastern Montana." He paused. "He'd have leverage over every rancher and farmer in this valley. Water in a dry year is worth more than gold." "Clara Putnam," Amelia said. "Is she aware of what he's after?" "She's 71 years old, and she's been told by Voss's lawyer that her property taxes are in arrears," Chester said. "Which may or may not be true. I haven't been able to verify it. But if it is true, and if she can't pay within 30 days, her property becomes eligible for acquisition under the existing consolidation framework." Nathaniel felt the cold weight of it settle across his shoulders. "He's running 2 plays at the same time." "He's been running them in parallel," Chester said. "Yours and Clara's. He needed the measure to pass at Thursday's meeting to finalize the legal mechanism. Without it, he has to rely on the tax delinquency route for Clara's property and a straight purchase offer for yours." He looked at Nathaniel. "But you coming back and refusing to sell has complicated his timeline." "He'll push for the vote regardless," Nathaniel said. "He'll push harder," Chester said. "Because now he needs the legal mechanism more than he did before. If you contest his claim to your property in court, a drawn-out legal fight is bad for him. He's leveraged on 3 other land purchases, and he needs the water rights to secure his financing." He leaned forward. "He needs this resolved before the end of the month." Amelia had been quiet throughout this. Now she said, "He's going to come after the property directly, before Thursday." Both men looked at her. "He can't wait," she said. "Nathaniel contesting the ownership, publicly filing the notice, showing up in town every day that goes on. It gets harder for Voss to claim the land was abandoned. He needs an incident. Something that justifies emergency action by the board before the meeting. She paused. He's going to manufacture one. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Chester Hale looked at Amelia with the expression of a man recalibrating his assessment of someone upward. What kind of incident, he said. Something that puts the property's stability in question, she said. A complaint about trespassing. A claim that the operation on the land is unlicensed or unsafe. A suggestion that there's been some kind of altercation. She looked at Nathaniel. He has men. He'll send them to the property to provoke something. And if we react, if there's any kind of confrontation that can be reported to the board, he uses it to argue that the ownership situation is chaotic and requires immediate resolution. Nathaniel looked at her. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since you told me he was watching your movements yesterday, she said. Chester Hale put both hands flat on the table. If he sends men to the property, you cannot engage with them. No confrontation, no argument, nothing that can be described as instability. He looked at Nathaniel directly. Whatever they do, you document it and you walk away. And if they damage the property, Nathaniel said. You document the damage, Chester said. And you bring it to the board on Thursday as evidence of Voss's conduct. Nathaniel held the older man's gaze. That requires a great deal of restraint from a man who spent 12 years doing a job that didn't involve a lot of restraint. I know what kind of work you've done, Chester said, not unkindly. I'm asking you to do a different kind now, the kind that wins in a courtroom instead of a field. The ride back to the ranch was faster than the ride out. Neither of them talked about what Chester had said, not because they were avoiding it, but because they were both running through it in their own heads, and there was nothing to add until they had processed it separately. They were half a mile from the property gate when Amelia said, "They're already there." Nathaniel looked up. 2 horses tied to the fence post outside the gate. 2 men standing in the road outside the property line, not on the property. Technically, not trespassing. Technically, just standing on a public road, with the particular studied casualness of men who wanted to appear like they had no particular reason for being exactly where they were. Nathaniel recognized the type immediately. "Don't stop," he said quietly. "I wasn't planning to," she said. They rode to the gate at a normal pace. Nathaniel dismounted, opened the gate, led his horse through, waited for Amelia to follow, and closed the gate again behind them. He did all of this without looking at the 2 men on the road. "Mr. Crowe," one of them said. Nathaniel turned. The man who had spoken was younger than he'd expected, mid-20s, trying to wear the expression of someone comfortable with confrontation, and not quite managing it. The other one was older, more seasoned, watching Nathaniel with the flat assessment of a man who had done this kind of work before. "Can I help you?" Nathaniel said pleasantly. "Mr. Voss would like to make one more offer on the property," the younger one said. "He's prepared to be generous." "I've already told Mr. Voss the property isn't for sale," Nathaniel said. "That position hasn't changed." "Mr. Voss thought you might want to reconsider," the younger one said, given the complexities of the situation. "What complexities are those?" The younger one glanced at Amelia, then back at Nathaniel. "A woman living alone on a man's property for over a year. No proper legal arrangement. Could raise questions." He paused, letting it sit. Questions that might be uncomfortable at a land board meeting. Nathaniel felt the anger move through him like something physical, fast and hot and completely controlled. Because Chester Hale had just told him exactly what this moment was designed to produce, and he was not going to give it to them. "My property manager has a formal legal agreement signed by the registered owner," Nathaniel said evenly. "Filed with the county yesterday. The situation is entirely regular." He turned back toward the house. "Good day, gentlemen. Mr. Crowe," the older one's voice this time, quieter, more deliberate. "Mr. Voss is not a patient man. It would be better for everyone if this resolved itself before Thursday." Nathaniel stopped, did not turn around. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation," the older one said. He turned around slowly. He looked at the older man, the way he had looked at a great many men in a great many difficult situations over 12 years. And the older man, to his credit, did not look away, but he also did not look comfortable. "Here's my observation," Nathaniel said quietly. You're standing on a public road, making observations about a private property dispute, which tells me you don't have a legal mechanism to do anything more than stand there and talk. If you had one, you'd be using it instead of talking." He paused. "Tell Mr. Voss that the Crowe Ranch is not for sale. Tell him the water rights are documented and filed. And tell him that if anyone sets foot on this property without an invitation before Thursday, I will personally ensure that Chester Hale hears about it in considerable detail before the land board meeting." The older man's expression shifted, just slightly. Chester Hale's name had landed the way Nathaniel had intended it to land. "Good day," Nathaniel said, and walked to the house. He did not look back. Behind him, he heard the sound of 2 horses being untied from the fence post and ridden away. Inside, Amelia put the kettle on and sat down at the table and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You were angry." "Yes," he said. "You didn't show it." "No." She looked at him. "That's harder than it looks." "Yes," he said again. She poured the coffee when it was ready and pushed his cup across the table, and they sat with the documents between them and worked through the afternoon, and at some point, the tension of the morning began to settle into something more workable, not gone, but organized the way a problem became less overwhelming when you broke it into its actual components, instead of feeling the weight of all of it at once. It was mid-afternoon when Nathaniel said Clara Putnam. Amelia looked up. "Chester said she might not know the full picture," he said. "She's been told her taxes are in arrears. She might not know why that information is being presented to her right now, or what Voss intends to do with it." Amelia was very still. "You want to go see her?" "I want someone to go see her," he said carefully. "Someone she might actually talk to." She looked at him for a long moment. "You think she'd talk to me?" "I think a 71 woman being told by a lawyer that she might lose her home is more likely to have an honest conversation with another woman than with a man she's never met." He paused. "And I think you know how to have that conversation." Amelia looked at the table. He could see her thinking through it, not hesitating out of fear, but working through the practicalities, the way she worked through everything methodically and without drama. "If her taxes are genuinely in arrears," she said, "there's nothing we can do about that in the next 2 days. "No," he said. "But if she has documentation, old deeds, property records, anything that establishes the water table connection that Voss is trying to exploit, it becomes evidence of a pattern. 2 landowners both targeted by the same man, through the same mechanisms within the same time frame." He looked at her. "It changes the story at the land board meeting from a property dispute to something that looks a great deal more like a scheme." Amelia stood up. "I'll go tomorrow morning," she said. "Early before we need to be in Red Hollow for the meeting. I'll come with you." "No," she said. "You need to be at the meeting early to speak with Chester. And you were right, she'll talk to me more easily without a strange man in the room." She picked up her coffee cup and took it to the basin. "I know what to listen for." He started to say something and stopped. "You're going to tell me to be careful." She set her back to him. "I was," he admitted. "I've been careful for 14 months, she said, not unkindly. "I know how to do it." He was quiet for a moment. "Miss Brooks," he said. She turned around. "I owe you an apology," he said. "When I rode onto this property 2 nights ago with my rifle out, I assumed you were a problem to be resolved. I assumed you had taken something that wasn't yours and that my job was to reclaim it." He held her gaze. "I was wrong, and I should have said that plainly before now." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said it now," she said quietly. "That's not the same as saying it when it mattered." "No," she agreed. "But it's not nothing either." She paused. "You could have forced me off the property the first night. You had every legal right. You didn't." She looked at him steadily. "That told me what I needed to know about your character. I didn't need the words." The morning of the land board meeting came in gray and cold. Amelia left before dawn for Clara Putnam's homestead. Nathaniel watched her ride out from the porch and felt the particular unease of a man who was accustomed to being the one who went into uncertain situations, and was now the one who stayed behind. He used the time to review the documents one more time, then saddled his horse and rode into Red Hollow. Chester Hale was already at the courthouse when Nathaniel arrived. So was Garrett Voss, standing with his lawyer, a precise, thin-faced man named Elbert, who had the look of someone who was comfortable making uncomfortable things appear legal, and two members of the land board who were having a conversation with Voss that stopped the moment they saw Nathaniel walk in. Chester caught Nathaniel's eye and gave him a look that said, "They've already been talking." The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was 7:45. Nathaniel sat down next to Chester and kept his face neutral. "They filed something this morning," Chester said quietly. "Voss's lawyer filed a complaint with the board clerk before the office opened. I don't know the full contents yet." "What kind of complaint?" "Property dispute escalation," Chester said. "Requesting emergency board intervention on the grounds that the ownership situation at the Crowe Ranch is unstable and presents a public interest concern." He paused. "They're trying to get the board to act before we present our documentation." "Can they do that?" "They're about to try," Chester said. Nathaniel looked across the room at Garrett Voss. Voss was looking back at him, smiling the same smile that didn't involve his eyes. "Where's Miss Brooks?" Chester asked quietly. "She'll be here," Nathaniel said. "The meeting starts at 10. "She'll be here," he said again. At 8:15, Elbert the lawyer presented the complaint to the board in a private session that Nathaniel was not invited to attend, and Chester was outvoted from blocking. Nathaniel sat in the public waiting area outside the boardroom and held his documents and waited. At 9:00 the door opened, and a clerk told him the board wished to see him. He went in alone. The three board members were seated at the front table. Chester was on the left, his expression carefully neutral. The two Voss men, Nathaniel had learned their names were Alderman Pruitt and Commissioner Dodge, were in the center and right, wearing the expressions of men who had already decided what they were going to say. Voss and Elbert were seated to the side as interested parties. Elbert had a stack of papers in front of him. "Mr. Crowe," Pruitt said, "the board has received a complaint this morning alleging that the current situation at the Crowe Ranch property constitutes an unstable ownership arrangement that may require emergency board resolution. As the registered property owner, you are on the notice of active ownership stamped by Aldrich with yesterday's date. Then Amelia's notebook. Then the formal property management agreement. The Crowe Ranch has been under active management since July of 1888, he said. The manager, Miss Amelia Brooks, was operating under my authority throughout that period. The water rights on the northeast quarter were registered by Harold Crowe in 1871 and have never been contested or relinquished. The property is not abandoned, has not been abandoned, and the ownership situation is entirely regular." He looked at Pruitt directly. "The complaint filed this morning is without factual basis." Elbert leaned forward. "The property management agreement is dated yesterday. It formalizes an arrangement that has been in practice for 14 months, Nathaniel said. "The documentation of that practice is in Miss Brooks's management records, which are on the table in front of you. A retroactive formalization is standard practice," Chester said from the left side of the table, his voice carrying the dry authority of 11 years on the board. "I can cite 4 precedents from this board's own records if you'd like, Elbert." Elbert closed his mouth. Pruitt looked at Dodge. Something passed between them. "The board will take a brief recess," Pruitt said. Nathaniel walked back to the waiting area. Chester followed him out a moment later. "They're going to stall," he said quietly. "They need time to talk to Voss about the water rights document. That's the piece they didn't know about. How much time do we have before the formal meeting?" Chester checked his watch. 40 minutes. "Amelia needs to be here," Nathaniel said, more to himself than Chester. "What is she bringing?" Chester asked. "I don't know yet," Nathaniel said honestly. "But she's bringing something. She doesn't go anywhere without coming back with something useful." Chester looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. "You trust her," he said, not a question. "Yes," Nathaniel said, and realized as he said it that it was the simplest and most complete truth he had spoken in a very long time. At 9:38, the courthouse door opened. Amelia walked in. She walked the way she always walked, with the steady, unhurried confidence of a woman who had decided a long time ago that she was allowed to take up the space she occupied. She was carrying a leather satchel he hadn't seen before, and beside her was a small, elderly woman with white hair and sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that said she had once been very tall and had lost a few inches to age, but not a fraction of an inch to defeat. Clara Putnam. Amelia met Nathaniel's eyes across the room. She gave him a look that said, "I have what we need." He felt something in his chest release that he hadn't realized he had been holding. "Mr. Hale," Amelia said, reaching them. "This is Clara Putnam. She has her original deed, the county survey from 1873, showing the water table boundary, and a letter from Garrett Voss's lawyer dated last month, demanding tax payment on what she believes are incorrectly calculated arrears." She opened the satchel. "She also has receipts proving she paid those taxes correctly through a Billings bank draft in August. The arrears notice is fraudulent." Chester Hale took the papers with both hands. He read for 30 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "This is enough." Garrett Voss chose that exact moment to walk out of the boardroom, likely expecting to find Nathaniel sitting alone and waiting. He stopped when he saw Clara Putnam. Something moved across his face that Nathaniel had never seen there before. It was the look of a man who understood in a single moment that his plan had stopped working. "Mrs. Putnam," Voss said, recovering quickly, his voice shifting to the warm register he used when he needed to appear unthreatening. "I didn't know you were coming into town today." Clara Putnam looked at him the way a 71-year-old woman looked at a man who had tried to steal her home through a fraudulent tax notice, which was to say, she did not look at him with any warmth whatsoever. "I imagine you didn't," she said. "Mrs. Putnam has agreed to present her documentation to the board," Chester said, still holding the papers and looking at Voss with the expression of a man who had waited 11 years for exactly this moment. "Regarding the survey boundaries of her property, the water table connection to the Crowe Ranch northeast quarter, and the accuracy of the tax arrears notice she received last month." Voss looked at Elbert. Elbert looked at the papers in Chester's hands. "I'd like to request a postponement of the meeting," Elbert said quickly. "New information has been introduced that the complainant requires time to—" "The complaint was filed this morning," Chester said. "New information has been presented in response to that complaint. The meeting proceeds as scheduled." He looked at Pruitt and Dodge, who had followed Voss out of the boardroom and were now standing with the particular stillness of men whose plan was dissolving in front of them. "Unless either of my colleagues has an objection, they'd like to make a matter of official record." Pruitt and Dodge said nothing. "Then we'll convene in 10 minutes, Chester said. Voss looked at Nathaniel. The smile was gone. All of it was gone. The ease, the confidence, the studied pleasantness of a man who had never expected to be in a room where his plan wasn't working. What was left underneath was something colder and less pleasant, and Nathaniel recognized it because he had seen it in a great many men over a great many years. It was the look of a man deciding how far he was actually willing to go. "This isn't finished, Crowe," Voss said. Low. Not quite quiet enough. Clara Putnam turned to look at him. "Yes, it is," she said. She said it the way old women sometimes said things, with the absolute certainty of someone who had lived long enough to know the difference between a threat that mattered and a threat that was just noise, and who had made her peace with both. Voss walked back into the boardroom. Nathaniel looked at Amelia. "How did you get her here?" he said quietly. Amelia's expression was difficult to read, somewhere between exhaustion and something that was not quite satisfaction, but was close to it. "I told her the truth," she said simply. "I told her what Voss was after, and why he needed her land, and why the tax notice had arrived exactly when it did. I told her about your water rights document and what it meant for her property." She paused. "And then I told her she had a choice. She could wait and see what happened, or she could come into town and make something happen, and she chose to come." She had her coat on before I finished the sentence, Amelia said. Clara Putnam had moved to stand with Chester Hale and was speaking to him in the quick, precise way of someone who had prepared what she wanted to say and intended to say all of it. Chester was listening with both hands, still holding her papers, and an expression that said he was hearing exactly what he needed to hear. "You didn't know what she had when you went to see her," Nathaniel said. "No," Amelia said. "You went on a feeling." "I went on a feeling," she agreed. That a woman being told her home was going to be taken from her probably had more fight in her than Garrett Voss was counting on. She looked at Nathaniel steadily. People usually do. He looked at her. I thought about a woman who had arrived at a broken-down abandoned ranch 14 months ago with nothing but her own judgment and her own two hands, and who had stayed when every reasonable calculation said to leave, and who had kept records and listened carefully and trusted her own intelligence, even when no one around her was treating that intelligence as worth anything. He thought about all the things he had assumed when he rode onto this property 2 nights ago with his rifle drawn. "Miss Brooks," he said. She looked up at him. "When this is over," he said carefully, "I would like to talk about a more permanent arrangement for the property. A real one. Not a management agreement, something with actual standing." She went very still. "What kind of standing?" she said. He held her gaze. "The kind that doesn't require you to wait for a stranger to ride back and decide your fate." Something moved across her face that he had not seen there before. Not surprise exactly. More like the expression of a person who had been bracing for a different kind of answer for so long that the right answer required a moment to land properly. "We should get through Thursday first," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "We should." Chester Hale appeared in the doorway of the boardroom. "We're ready," he said. Nathaniel straightened his coat, picked up his documents from the bench where he had laid them. Amelia stood beside him. "Ready," he said. "I've been ready," she said. They walked into the boardroom together, and the door closed behind them, and outside the Red Hollow courthouse. The Montana morning was moving into afternoon, cold and clear, and indifferent to the battles being fought inside by the people who had decided that some things were worth fighting for. Garrett Voss sat across the room with his lawyer and his calculations and his certainty that the world arranged itself according to his plans. He had not yet understood that the world had other plans entirely, but he was about to. The boardroom was smaller than Nathaniel expected for a place where so much had been decided about so many people's lives. Pruitt called the meeting to order with a wooden gavel that sounded too loud in the tight space, and the sound of it had a finality that Nathaniel felt in his back teeth. He sat to Chester's left. Amelia sat beside him. Clara Putnam sat on Amelia's other side with her hands folded on top of her leather satchel and her eyes fixed on Pruitt with the particular attention of a woman who had not come this far to miss a single word. Across the room, Garrett Voss sat with Elbert and said nothing. He had recovered his composure since the hallway. The cold calculation was back behind his eyes, and he was watching the room the way a man watched a card game. He was losing, not panicking, but looking for the hand that would change everything. Nathaniel knew that look. He had seen it in a great many men. The ones who wore it well were the ones who were most dangerous because they did not give up simply because the obvious path had closed. They found another one. He kept that in his awareness and turned his attention to Pruitt. "The board has before it this morning a complaint filed by counsel for Garrett Voss," Pruitt said, reading from the paper in front of him, in the flat tone of a man reciting something he has memorized, rather than something he believes, alleging that the ownership situation at the Crowe Ranch property constitutes an unstable arrangement requiring emergency board resolution and requesting that the board exercise its authority under the proposed land consolidation measure to appoint a temporary administrator pending a formal ownership determination. Chester said immediately, "The consolidation measure has not passed. It cannot be applied." Elbert said, "The board has the authority to." "The board has the authority granted to it by past measures," Chester said. "Not proposed ones. The consolidation measure is currently tabled. It has no legal force and cannot be cited as the basis for any board action." He looked at Pruitt directly. "If my colleague is unclear on this point, I am happy to read him the relevant section of the county charter. I have it here." He produced a document from inside his coat and laid it on the table. Pruitt looked at it. Looked at Dodge. Dodge said nothing. "The complaint will be addressed under existing board authority," Pruitt said, which was not an agreement with Chester, but was also not a disagreement, and which told Nathaniel that Pruitt was already hedging, already calculating which way the wind was blowing, and whether he wanted to be on the wrong side of it. "Mr. Crowe," Pruitt continued, "the board invites you to present your response to the complaint." Nathaniel stood. He had spent 12 years presenting arguments in difficult rooms to people who did not want to hear them, and the skill of it was knowing that the first thing you said set the temperature for everything that followed. You could be conciliatory, or you could be direct, and direct was almost always better when the other side had already tried to move before the meeting started. "The complaint is without factual basis," he said, and put the water rights document on the table. The Crowe Ranch water rights were registered in 1871 by Harold Crowe through the Billings Land Registry. The claim covers the spring on the northeast quarter and all surface water originating on or beneath that land. The claim has never been contested or relinquished. He paused. This document was in the property records box in the ranch house. It was not lost. It was not abandoned. It was waiting. He put the notice of active ownership beside it. The property has been under active management since July of 1888. 14 months of documented agricultural operation maintenance and continuous habitation. The property manager, Miss Amelia Brooks, was authorized by me to operate the property on my behalf. That authorization has been formalized in a legal agreement filed with the county yesterday. He put the management agreement on top. Then he put Amelia's notebook on the table. "This is the management record," he said. 14 months of daily entries, crops planted, livestock managed, repairs made, and every person who came to that property and what business they had there. It is the most thorough property management record I have seen in 12 years of legal and land work. He looked at Pruitt steadily. The property is not abandoned. The ownership is not in dispute. And the complaint filed this morning is not a legitimate concern about public interest. It is an attempt by a private party to use this board as a mechanism to acquire property and water rights that do not belong to him. Elbert was on his feet. The board should note that the management agreement referenced by Mr. Crowe was filed yesterday, one day before this meeting, and is clearly a retroactive document created to Elbert. Chester's voice was quiet and absolute. "Sit down." Elbert sat down. The instinct was apparently stronger than the strategy, because he was clearly surprised that he had done it. "The board will hear from Mrs. Putnam," Chester said. Clara Putnam stood up. She was a small woman, and the room made her smaller, but she stood the way a person stood when they had decided that the truth was the only thing they had, and it was enough, and she put her papers on the table one at a time and told the board exactly what Garrett Voss's lawyer had done with a fraudulent tax arrears notice and a 30-day deadline, and the studied cruelty of a system being used to grind down an old woman who was alone and had no one standing beside her. Until today. "I paid my taxes," she said, and her voice did not shake. "I paid them in August through the Billings Bank the same way I have paid them every year for 18 years. I have the receipt. I have the bank confirmation. And I received a notice last month telling me I was in arrears." She looked at Voss directly. "A notice that came 4 weeks after a man I had never spoken to offered to buy my property for a price that assumed it was worthless." The boardroom was very quiet. Pruitt looked at the receipts she had placed on the table. He looked at them for a long time. "The board will need to verify these documents," Pruitt said. "Verify them," Clara said. "I have been waiting 18 years to have something verified. I am not in a hurry." Something shifted in the room. Then, something that was not dramatic. Not the sudden reversal of a story that resolved itself cleanly, but the slower, more real shift of people, recalibrating where they stood based on what they were seeing. Dodge, who had not said a word since the meeting began, put down the pen he had been holding and leaned back in his chair. It was a small movement, but Nathaniel saw it, and Chester saw it, and Voss saw it, and all three of them understood what it meant. Dodge was getting off the horse. The calculation had shifted, and he was choosing not to go down with it. Elbert leaned toward Voss and said something in a voice too low to hear. Voss listened without moving. Then he said just loud enough for Nathaniel to catch, "Not yet. Not yet." Nathaniel felt his attention sharpen. "The board will take a 30-minute recess to review the documentation," Pruitt said. They filed out. In the hallway, Amelia stood with Clara Putnam, and Chester and Nathaniel pulled Chester 2 steps away. "Voss isn't done," Nathaniel said quietly. "He said something to his lawyer. Not yet. He's holding something back." Chester's expression did not change. "I was expecting this." "What is he holding?" Chester was quiet for a moment. "There is one mechanism left to him. If he can demonstrate that the water rights claim was improperly filed, technical defects in the original registration, witnesses who can't be verified, procedural errors in the 1871 filing, he can challenge the validity of the claim itself, not the current ownership." He paused. "It would take the dispute out of the board's jurisdiction entirely and put it in the territorial court." "Which would take months," Nathaniel said. "Minimum," Chester said. "And which would leave the property in legal limbo during that time, potentially eligible for the consolidation measure if it passes while the court case is pending." Nathaniel looked across the hallway at Amelia. She was speaking quietly to Clara Putnam, one hand briefly touching the older woman's arm, and Clara was nodding with the careful steadiness of someone receiving information they had needed for a long time. He could not hear what Amelia was saying, but he could see the effect of it. Clara's shoulders, which had been tight since they walked in, settled slightly. She breathed differently. He turned back to Chester. "The 1871 filing. My father's water rights claim. How solid is it?" "I don't know the specifics of the documentation," Chester said carefully. "If Voss's lawyer has already examined it, then he would have filed a court challenge directly instead of trying the board approach," Chester said. "Which means either the filing is solid and he couldn't find a defect, or he stopped. Or he hasn't examined it yet," Nathaniel said. Chester looked at him. "Where is the original document?" "In the property records box," Nathaniel said. "At the ranch. And the copy you filed with Aldrich yesterday?" "Is a copy," Nathaniel said. "Not certified against the original. If Voss's lawyer requests to examine the original filing and finds even a technical discrepancy between the copy and the original, he creates enough ambiguity to push it to a court challenge," Chester said. The recess had 15 minutes left. Nathaniel made a decision. He crossed the hallway to Amelia. She looked up at him immediately, reading his expression with the accuracy that had started to feel over 3 days. Less surprising, and more simply like the way things were between them. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you not to react visibly." Her expression did not change. "All right. The original water rights document is at the ranch," he said quietly. "In the property box. If Voss's lawyer demands to examine the original and finds anything at all that can be read as a discrepancy with the copy we filed, he can push this into territorial court and keep the property in limbo long enough for the consolidation measure to apply." He paused. "I need someone at the ranch, right now, to secure the document and bring it here before the recess ends." She was already calculating. He could see it. "Who do you trust to ride that fast?" "Nobody in this town," he said. "That's the problem." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Go back into the boardroom. Make sure the recess runs its full 30 minutes. Don't let them reconvene early." "What are you?" "I know a man," she said. "A ranch hand named Tully, who has eaten at my table 12 times and who rides faster than anyone I've seen in this valley. He was at the feed store when we rode in." She was already moving. 30 minutes, Nathaniel. Don't let them cut it short." She was through the courthouse door before he could answer. He went back to Chester. "Keep the recess at 30 minutes, he said. Chester looked at him. "What is she doing?" "Something useful," Nathaniel said. I went back into the boardroom. Pruitt and Dodge were reviewing documents at the front table. Voss and Elbert were in conference at the side, their voices too low to carry. Nathaniel sat in his chair and watched Elbert's hands, a lawyer's tells, were usually in the hands, and Elbert's were moving with the precise contained energy of a man assembling an argument. He was preparing the court challenge. At 28 minutes, Nathaniel stood and said, "Mr. Pruitt, given the complexity of the documentation the board is reviewing, I'd like to request an additional 15 minutes before we reconvene." Pruitt looked up. The recess was set for 30 minutes. The water rights document from 1871 requires cross-referencing against the county survey records from the same period, Nathaniel said smoothly. "Chester, am I correct that the 1871 survey is in the board's reference files?" Chester without missing a beat. "It is, and the cross-reference would be relevant to the board's assessment." Pruitt looked at Dodge. Dodge said, "I have no objection to 15 additional minutes." It was the first thing Dodge had said all morning. His voice was the voice of a man who was picking a side, and the side he was picking was not Garrett Voss's. 15 additional minutes, Pruitt said. Across the room, Elbert looked at Voss. Voss was looking at Nathaniel. At 39 minutes, the courthouse door opened. Amelia walked in with a man Nathaniel had never seen before, lean dusty from a fast ride holding a leather document case, and she crossed the room to Nathaniel in 12 steps and put the document case in his hands. "The original," she said quietly. Tully rode hard. Nathaniel opened the case. The original water rights document from 1871 was there, the actual paper his father had held when he filed it, with the original registrar's seal and the original witness signatures. He compared it in 30 seconds against the copy he had presented to the board. They were identical, word for word, seal for seal. He felt the last point of vulnerability close. He looked at Amelia. She looked back at him with the particular expression of someone who had done what needed doing and was now waiting for the next thing. "Thank you," he said. "Thank Tully," she said. He wrote it in 22 minutes. Pruitt called the meeting back to order. Nathaniel stood and placed the original document on the table alongside the copy. "The original 1871 water rights filing," he said. "The board is welcome to compare it against the copy filed yesterday. They are identical." He looked at Elbert. "If there are questions about the validity of the original filing, I am prepared to address them now." Elbert looked at the document. He picked it up, read it carefully, put it back down. He leaned toward Voss and said something. Voss's jaw tightened. "The complainant has no further questions regarding the water rights filing," Elbert said. Chester Hale looked at Pruitt. "Then I move that the board dismiss the complaint on the grounds that it lacks factual basis, that the Crowe Ranch property is demonstrably not abandoned, that the water rights claim is valid and documented, and that the fraudulent tax arrears notice presented to Mrs. Putnam be referred to the Territorial Attorney's Office for investigation." The room went very still. Pruitt said, "I'll need a second." Dodge said, "Seconded." Pruitt looked at the table in front of him for a moment. He looked at the water rights document. He looked at Amelia's notebook. He looked at Clara Putnam's tax receipts. He looked at Garrett Voss. Then he said, "Motion carries. Complaint dismissed. The matter of Mrs. Putnam's tax notice is referred to the Territorial Attorney." He brought the gavel down. Garrett Voss stood up. "This board," he said, and his voice had lost the pleasant register entirely, "has just made a significant error in judgment. I want that noted for the record." "It's noted," Chester said. "As is your objection to the referral of a fraudulent tax notice to the Territorial Attorney." Voss looked at Chester Hale with the particular fury of a man who had spent years arranging things exactly as he wanted them, and had encountered for perhaps the first time something he could not arrange. He picked up his hat, looked at Nathaniel. "This isn't the end," he said. "No." Nathaniel agreed. "It's not." He paused. "But it's the end of this." Voss walked out. Elbert followed, carrying his stack of papers and wearing the expression of a lawyer who was already calculating which of his other clients were going to become complicated once the Territorial Attorney started asking questions. The boardroom breathed again. Clara Putnam put both hands over her face for a moment, not crying, or not quite, but doing the thing that happened just before or just after crying, when a person had been holding something very tightly for a very long time and could finally put it down. Amelia put her hand on the older woman's shoulder and said nothing because she understood that some moments did not need words, and Clara Putnam had enough words of her own when she was ready. Chester came around the table and shook Nathaniel's hand. "Well done," he said simply. "The original document was her idea," Nathaniel said. "All of it was her idea, most of it." Chester looked at Amelia. "I know," he said. "I've been watching her since she walked into this room." He paused. "A woman who thinks 3 moves ahead of a problem is a woman this valley has needed for a long time." They rode back to the Crowe Ranch in the afternoon. Nathaniel and Amelia and Clara Putnam, who Chester had arranged to accompany with one of his own men for the ride back to her homestead. Clara sat her horse with the straightness of someone who had just won something they had deserved to win, and she talked more on that ride than Nathaniel suspected she had talked in months. She talked about her husband, who had filed the original homestead claim in 1871, the same year Harold Crowe had filed his water rights. She talked about the years they had spent building the property into something the two of them, and how she had continued alone after he died, and how continuing alone had not been as impossible as people assumed it would be, because she had learned in 40 years of marriage to a practical man that most problems had practical solutions if you approach them without panic. She reminded Nathaniel in a way that sat quietly in his chest for the rest of the ride of Amelia. At the gate of the Crowe Ranch, they stopped to let Clara and Chester's man continue north toward her homestead. Clara reached from her horse and put one hand briefly on Amelia's arm. "Come see me," she said. "When this settles, I have apple trees and more preserves than one person can eat before spring." "I'll come," Amelia said. Clara looked at Nathaniel. "You have good judgment," she said, in a tone that indicated she meant something more specific than the land board meeting. He understood what she meant. He did not know quite what to do with it. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. She rode on. He and Amelia went through the gate and up to the house, and it was the first time since he had arrived 3 nights ago that the crisis was not actively in front of them, not pressing, not requiring immediate action, just settled into the particular quiet that came after something had been resolved. It was a strange kind of quiet. He had not lived inside it for a long time. She put the kettle on. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the document case she had brought from the feed store and thought about a ranch hand named Tully, who had ridden 22 minutes at full speed, because a woman who had fed him 12 times without asking for more than he could pay had asked him to. "How did you know he'd do it?" Nathaniel said. Amelia turned from the stove. "Do what?" "Tully. Ride that fast for you. Take the time away from his work. Risk the horse on that road with no payment offered, and no real explanation." She thought about it for a moment. "I didn't know," she said. "I asked, and he said yes." She paused. "People usually do when you ask them plainly, and they trust you." "He trusted you." "I fed him," she said simply. 12 times. Without making him feel small about what he could pay, she turned back to the stove. "People remember how you treated them when they had nothing," Tully remembered. Nathaniel thought about that. He thought about the specific arithmetic of it. 12 meals given without condition, and returned today as a 22-minute ride that had closed the last gap in their defense before Voss could exploit it. He thought about how that kind of arithmetic didn't appear in any ledger, didn't show up in any property record, didn't register in any of the calculations that men like Voss used to assess value and leverage and strategic advantage. And yet here it was. Having determined everything. "Miss Brooks," he said. She turned around and looked at him. "What you said in the boardroom today," he said. "About the management records. About operating the property under my authority." He paused. "You never once mentioned yourself. Your own work, your own stake, your own 14 months, you presented all of it as being in service of the property and in service of me." He held her gaze. That was a choice. She looked at him steadily. It was the argument that worked. "It was also a sacrifice," he said. "Of your own standing. You made yourself smaller than you are so the legal case would hold." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been made smaller than I am my whole life," she said. "The difference is, I chose it this time, for a reason that mattered." She looked at him directly. "That's not the same thing." He stood up from the table. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her close enough that the conversation had changed its nature, close enough that both of them were aware of exactly what kind of moment this was, and he said, "I told you before the meeting that I wanted to talk about a more permanent arrangement for the property. Something with real standing." "You did," she said. Her voice was careful. Not closed careful the way a person was careful with something that mattered. "I meant it," he said. "I want you to have actual ownership standing, not a management agreement, not an authorization from me that could be revoked if I chose to revoke it." He paused. "This land needs someone who will protect it. I have spent 12 years proving I am not that person. You have spent 14 months proving you are." She looked at him. Nathaniel. It was the first time she had used his given name. He noticed it. You came back, she said quietly. You could have signed the papers and left. You could have taken Voss's money and told yourself the memories weren't worth the trouble. Her voice was steady. You didn't. You stayed and you fought, and you put yourself between this land and a man who had been planning to take it for 2 years. She paused. You are that person. You've been that person since the first night. He looked at her for a long moment. I want to stay, he said. It came out plainly without performance the way the truest things came out when a person stopped managing them. Not to manage the sale, not to resolve the legal situation. I want to stay because this is the first place I have stood in 12 years that felt like somewhere I was supposed to be. He paused. And because you're here. The kitchen was very quiet. Amelia looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and he could see her taking in the full weight of what he had said. Not deflecting it, not minimizing it, not doing the thing that people who had been told they were not worth staying for learned to do, which was to protect themselves by not quite believing it. She believed it. He could see the moment she let herself. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. I never planned to. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, the way a person reached for something they had decided was theirs to reach for, and she let him hold it, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she turned back to the stove with her hand still in his and said, The kettle's ready. He laughed. It surprised him, the sound of it, how it felt like something that had been stored in a part of him that he had not accessed in a very long time. Of course it is, he said. She poured the coffee, and he set the table, and they sat across from each other, the way they had sat since the first night, except that something had shifted in the weight and quality of the silence between them. It was not the silence of two people working through a crisis. It was the silence of two people who had come through something together and were beginning to understand what the other side of it looked like. What it looked like was this: a kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee, the late afternoon light coming through the window of a house that had been dead and was not anymore. Voss will file a court challenge, Nathaniel said after a while. I know, Amelia said. It could take months. It could be expensive. I know that too. You're not worried. She looked at him. I'm practical, she said. There's a difference. Being practical means I understand that Voss still has options, and we need to be prepared for all of them. She paused. Being worried means I lose sleep over things I can't control tonight. I stopped doing that a long time ago. He looked at her. When, about 6 months into living alone on this property, she said, when I figured out that worry was just fear with nowhere useful to go. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I started using that energy for something else. For preparation, he said. For preparation, she agreed. He thought about what Chester Hale had said in the hallway. A woman who thinks 3 moves ahead of a problem is a woman this valley has needed for a long time. I thought about the valley. He thought about Red Hollow and the way it had treated her, the laughter outside the milliner's, the dismissal at the dry goods counter. All the small and large ways a community communicated to a person that they did not count. He thought about how she had absorbed all of that and kept working, kept building, kept feeding people without making them feel small, and had ended up with something that no one who had laughed at her could have predicted. She had ended up indispensable. The town is going to know what happened today, he said. Chester won't talk, but Dodge will, and the referral to the territorial attorney will be public record. I know, she said. People will have things to say, about you, about us, about the situation. She looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. Nathaniel, she said, people in Red Hollow have been having things to say about me since I arrived. I have not yet found a reason to let it change what I do. He looked at her across the table. No, he said. I don't imagine you have. Outside the kitchen window, the Montana afternoon was settling toward evening, the light going golden and long across the land that his father had built and lost and left, and that a stranger had saved, and that he had come back to erase and could not now imagine letting go. Down the road in Red Hollow, Garrett Voss was in his lawyer's office, going through the remaining options with the cold efficiency of a man who was not finished. Nathaniel knew that. He was prepared for it. They both were. But tonight, the ranch was quiet, and the coffee was hot, and the woman sitting across the table from him had 14 months of proof that this land was worth every fight it was going to take. And for the first time in 12 years, Nathaniel Crowe was exactly where he was supposed to be. The letter from the Territorial Attorney's Office arrived on a Tuesday 3 weeks after the Land Board meeting, and Nathaniel read it at the kitchen table with his second cup of coffee going cold beside him. Amelia was outside. He could hear her moving along the fence line, the particular rhythm of her work methodical and unhurried, the kind of sound that had become in 3 weeks. Something he listened for without thinking about it. The way you listened for sounds that meant things were right. He put the letter down. Then he picked it up and read it again because the first time through he had been moving fast and he wanted to make sure he had understood every word correctly. He had. I went to the door. Amelia. She looked up from the fence. Something in his voice made her put down what she was holding immediately and walk toward the house, and he watched her come and thought not for the first time in 3 weeks that she moved through the world with a kind of certainty that most people spent their whole lives trying to manufacture and never quite achieved. With her, it was simply there. It had probably always been there. The world had just spent a long time trying to convince her otherwise. She came up the porch steps and took the letter from his hand and read it standing in the doorway with the morning light behind her. She read it twice, same as he had. Then she said, "They're opening a formal investigation into the tax arrears notice sent to Clara Putnam," he said, "and into 2 other notices sent to landowners in the county in the past 18 months, both of which, according to the attorney's office, show the same pattern of calculation errors as Clara's." Amelia looked up from the letter. "He's done this before." "At least twice," Nathaniel said. "That they've found so far." She handed the letter back to him. Her expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more serious than triumph. The look of a person absorbing the full shape of something they had only partially understood before. "How many people lost their land because of those notices?" "I don't know yet," he said. "Chester is working with the attorney's office. We'll know more by the end of the week." She was quiet for a moment. "Clara needs to know today," she said. "I'll ride to her homestead this afternoon," he said. "I'll come with you," she said. And it was not a question, and he did not treat it as one. She went back to the fence, and he went back to the table, and the cold coffee, and the letter, and thought about Garrett Voss, sitting in his office in Red Hollow right now, understanding for the first time that the situation had moved entirely beyond his ability to manage it. Not just the board complaint, not just the failed acquisition. The entire pattern of what he had been doing, and to whom was now in the hands of people whose job was to document it and act on it. The knock on the door came at 11 o'clock. Nathaniel was at the table when he heard it, not the sound of someone approaching, because he had not heard a horse. Just the knock itself. 3 sharp raps, the kind that expected to be answered immediately. He opened the door. The man on the porch was not one of Voss's men. He was older 50s with a badge on his coat that Nathaniel recognized as a territorial deputy's badge, and behind him on the road were 2 more men on horseback. "Mr. Crowe," the deputy said. "I'm Deputy Marshal Elias Cord. I'm here on behalf of the Territorial Attorney's Office." He paused. "We're executing a search warrant on the Red Hollow Bank and on Garrett Voss's business office this morning. I'm here to inform you as a named party in the investigation and to request your cooperation in providing copies of any documentation related to the Crowe Ranch property and the water rights claim filed in 1871. Nathaniel looked at him for a moment. "Come in," he said. Amelia appeared from the back of the house before he had finished pouring water for the deputy. She looked at the badge, looked at Nathaniel. He gave her a slight nod, and she sat at the table with the particular focused stillness of someone preparing to hear something important. Deputy Cord was methodical and precise. The investigation had been opened 48 hours earlier, based on Clara Putnam's receipts and the documentation Chester Hale had submitted to the Territorial Attorney's Office the morning after the board meeting. In those 48 hours, the Attorney's Office had identified 3 additional landowners who had received fraudulent tax notices, and 2 who had sold their properties to Voss in the preceding 2 years, under circumstances that were now being examined. We believe Mr. Voss has been systematically targeting small landowners with fabricated tax delinquency notices, Cord said, using the threat of forced sale to acquire properties at below-market prices, and in some cases manufacturing the conditions for acquisition through the County Land Board's consolidation framework. He paused. The water rights on your property appear to have been the primary target of a scheme that has been in preparation for approximately 2 years. Amelia said, "The people who already sold, can they get their land back?" Cord looked at her. "That will depend on the court proceedings," he said carefully. "In cases where fraud is proven, there are mechanisms for rescission of the sale. It is not guaranteed, but it is possible." She nodded. She did not look satisfied by that answer, because it was not a satisfying answer. It was a true one, which was a different thing, but she absorbed it with the practical directness she brought to every piece of information that was difficult. "What do you need from us?" Nathaniel said. "Copies of everything you have," Cord said. "The original water rights document, the notice of active ownership, the management records, the property management agreement, and a signed statement from Miss Brooks describing in detail her 14 months on the property, specifically any interactions with Garrett Voss or his representatives." Amelia said, "I'll write the statement today." "I'd appreciate that, ma'am," Cord said. "I was there for 2 hours." When he left, he had copies of everything and Amelia's statement written in her precise hand at the kitchen table, while Cord and Nathaniel went through the property documents, 6 pages covering 14 months of what she had seen and heard and recorded in the careful, methodical way she recorded everything, which was to say, with the kind of detail that left nothing ambiguous and nothing open to interpretation. Cord read it at the table before he left. "Ma'am," he said, setting it down. "This is one of the clearest witness statements I have received in 11 years of this work." Amelia looked at him. "I kept records," she said simply. "I knew they'd matter eventually." Cord picked up his hat, looked at Nathaniel. "You'll be contacted by the attorney's office within the week regarding the formal proceedings. I'd recommend retaining your own legal counsel." He paused. "Chester Hale has already provided his own statement. Between the 3 of you, the case is considerably stronger than it was 4 days ago." He left. The house was quiet after he went. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen and looked at the table where the copies of the documents had been laid out and taken away, and felt the particular strange lightness of a situation that had been pressing down on him for 3 weeks, beginning to lift, not gone, not resolved, but moving now in the right direction, with enough momentum that the outcome was becoming visible. "It's going to take months," Amelia said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the table, at the empty space where the papers had been. "Yes," he said. "Voss will fight every step of it." "Yes. And some of those people who sold their land." She stopped. "Some of them probably won't get it back, even if the fraud is proven. Because proving fraud and undoing a completed sale are 2 different things, and the courts don't always—" She stopped again. "No," he said. "They don't always." She was quiet for a moment. "It's not enough," she said. Not angry, just honest. "No," he said. "It's not." He crossed the kitchen and stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because some things were true and incomplete at the same time, and trying to make them feel otherwise was a disservice to the people they were thinking about. Then she straightened. "We should ride to Clara's," she said. "She needs to hear this from us, not from a deputy showing up unannounced." They rode to Clara Putnam's homestead in the early afternoon, and when they told her about the investigation and the warrant and what Cord had said about the possibility of rescission for fraudulent sales, Clara sat in her kitchen chair and looked at the table and did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "There's a family, the Wellers. They had a homestead on the south edge of the valley, 3 children. They sold 8 months ago after a tax notice. They're in Billings now renting." She looked up. "James Weller told me he cried when he handed over the deed. He built that house himself." Amelia said, "Chester's working with the attorney's office on exactly this." "Will it be enough?" "I don't know," Amelia said honestly. "But Chester knows about the Wellers specifically. He mentioned them. He's trying." Clara nodded, the nod of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that trying and succeeding were different things, and that trying was still worth something. She made them coffee, and they stayed for an hour. And when they rode back, the afternoon was going long and golden over the valley. And Amelia was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking something through that she wasn't ready to say yet. He let her think. "A mile from the ranch gate," she said, "I want to do something for the Wellers." He looked at her. "I don't know what yet," she said. "I don't have money. I have this." She gestured a small movement that encompassed the land around them, the ranch ahead of them, the kitchen where she had been feeding people for 14 months. "I can feed people. I can give people a place to work if they need work. If the Wellers come back to the valley before they have a place to land, I want them to be able to land here." He looked at her for a long moment. "This is your ranch too," he said. "That decision is yours to make." She turned her head and looked at him. "Nathaniel." "I mean it," he said. "I told you before the board meeting that I wanted you to have real standing. I have not yet done anything about it formally. That ends this week." He held her gaze. "I'm going to Billings on Friday. I'm going to see the land attorney. And I'm going to put your name on the deed." She went very still. "Half," he said. "Equal. Not a management agreement. Not an authorization. Your name on the deed same as mine, with the same rights and the same standing in every court and every land board in this territory." She looked at him the way she had looked at the letter from the territorial attorney, reading every word, making sure she had understood it correctly. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said. "That's not why I'm doing it." "Then why?" He looked out at the land, at the fence she had repaired, and the gate she had kept open, and the fields that were green, because she had found the water and used it carefully, and trusted that it was worth protecting, even when no one else did. "Because this land is alive because of you," he said, "and because you have spent your whole life being told you didn't deserve the things you had earned. I'm not going to be another person who tells you that." He paused. "And because I intend to stay. And if I'm staying, I want to be staying alongside someone who has an equal stake. Not a woman who can be told to leave if the circumstances change." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but more open. The way a voice sounded when the person speaking had put down something heavy they had been carrying without realizing it. "I've been told my whole life that I was too much and not enough at the same time," she said. "Too big, too plain, not wealthy enough, not connected enough, not the kind of woman that men stayed for." She paused. "I stopped believing those things had to be true, but I kept waiting for the next person to prove them right." He looked at her. "I'm not that person," he said. "No," she said quietly. "You're not." They rode through the gate of the Crowe Ranch together as the sun went to the horizon, and he latched the gate behind them with the same latch she had fixed 14 months ago on a property that wasn't hers, and that she had protected anyway. And neither of them said anything else, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and the rest of it would be built slowly, practically day by day, the same way everything worth having was built. The following Friday, Nathaniel rode to Billings. He was gone for 2 days. When he came back, he had a new deed in the document case, the same case that Tully had ridden 22 minutes to retrieve, and that had closed the last gap in their defense at the board meeting. The deed had 2 names on it. The water rights document was attached to it as an exhibit formally certified against the original, with a notation from the land attorney, confirming that the 1871 filing was valid uncontested, and now held jointly by the registered owners. He put the document case on the kitchen table. Amelia looked at it. She did not open it immediately. She stood with her hands on the table on either side of it, and looked at it the way a person looked at something that had taken a long time to arrive, and that they were not entirely sure was real. "Open it," he said. She opened it. She read the deed. Both names. The water rights exhibit. The attorney's certification. She read all of it without looking up. Then she closed the case carefully. She looked at him. He expected her to say something, anything, the words that a moment like this seemed to require. What she did instead was cross the kitchen in 4 steps, and put her arms around him, and he put his arms around her, and they stood in the kitchen of the Crowe Ranch for a long time without saying a word. It was enough. It was more than enough. The territorial attorney's investigation ran for 4 months. In those 4 months, Garrett Voss's lawyer filed 3 separate motions to have the investigation dismissed, all of which were denied. Voss himself appeared before the territorial court twice and spent a great deal of money trying to make his own conduct appear to be standard business practice. The court was not persuaded. In February of 1890, Garrett Voss was found liable for fraudulent misrepresentation in the acquisition of 2 properties and the submission of false tax delinquency notices to 4 landowners, including Clara Putnam. His business assets were frozen pending judgment. The land consolidation measure, the one Chester had voted against twice, and that Voss had designed specifically to give himself a legal mechanism for acquisition, was struck from the county framework entirely. The Weller family received a judgment for rescission of their forced sale. James Weller got his deed back in March. Nathaniel heard about it from Chester, who sent a letter that arrived on a Thursday morning while Amelia was at the kitchen table going through the spring planting records. He read it and put it down in front of her without saying anything. She read it. She read it twice, same as always. Then she put her hand over her eyes and sat very still for a moment. And when she took her hand away, her eyes were bright, and she looked at the table and said, "Good." Just that one word. But the way she said it carried everything she had felt for 4 months about the people who had lost things they had built and deserved to get back. He said, "Chester also says the town wants to do something. For what happened? For the investigation." He paused. "For you." She looked up. "What kind of something?" she said carefully. "He didn't specify," Nathaniel said. "He said people have been talking. Apparently the story about what happened at the land board meeting, about the ride, about the original document, about what you'd been doing out here alone for 14 months has gotten around." She was quiet. "I don't need anything from the town," she said. "I know you don't," he said. "But they might need something from you, the chance to be better than they were." He held her gaze. "That's worth something too." She thought about it. "Then they can come to the table," she said. "The same way everyone else does, with what they have. And they eat, and they're welcome, and it doesn't matter what they said before." She paused. "That's what I have to offer. I've never had anything else." He looked at her across the kitchen table of the ranch they both owned in the house they both kept on the land, where a spring ran quiet and steady through the northeast quarter, feeding a garden that grew a little larger every season. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." Spring came to the Crowe ranch, like it always had, slowly at first, and then all at once the kind of season change that happened while you were looking somewhere else, and turned around to find the whole world different. The fields that had been frozen turned soft. The garden went back into the ground. The kitchen table was never empty for long. Tully came back for the spring fencing work, and brought 2 other men who had heard from him that the Crowe ranch was a place worth working. Clara Putnam came by on the 2nd Saturday of April with 2 jars of apple preserves and a comfortable familiarity that said she intended to make the visit a habit. Chester Hale stopped in one evening on his way back from Red Hollow and stayed for dinner, and left looking more settled than he had looked in years. And on a Thursday in late April, a family rode up to the gate, a man and a woman and 3 children, the youngest barely walking, the oldest old enough to hold the reins herself. James Weller. Nathaniel was at the fence on the west side of the property when they arrived. He saw Amelia go to the gate before he could cross the yard. He watched her unlatch it and hold it open and say something to Weller that he couldn't hear from that distance, and watched Weller get down from his horse and take off his hat and hold it in both hands the way a man held his hat when he was trying to say something bigger than the words he had. Nathaniel walked across the yard. By the time he reached the gate, Amelia had already brought the Weller children inside, the youngest on her hip, the 2 older ones following with the cautious wonder of children who had been in hard circumstances long enough to be careful about hoping for good ones. Weller was still standing at the gate with his hat in his hands. He looked at Nathaniel. "Mr. Crowe," he said. "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "We got the deed back. The attorney's office sent it last week. And I'm not sure I understand yet what that means. What it's going to take to go back and start over." He looked at the ground. "But my wife, she said the first thing we needed to do before we went back to the homestead was come here. She said we needed to thank the person who started all of it." Nathaniel looked at him. "That wasn't me," he said. He nodded toward the house. "Go inside. She'll feed you, and she'll tell you what actually happened, and I promise you'll understand it better after you eat something." Weller looked at the house. Something moved across his face. Relief and disbelief, and the particular fragile gratitude of a man who had lost something and gotten it back, and not yet finished understanding that both things were real. He went inside. Nathaniel stood at the gate for a moment, listening to the sounds from inside Amelia's voice, the children's voices, the domestic ordinary sounds of a kitchen being used by people who needed it. He latched the gate. He went inside. The kitchen table had 7 people around it. By the time he sat down himself, Amelia James and Sarah Weller. 3 children and a kind of noise and warmth that the house had not held since before his mother died. He sat at the end of the table and watched Amelia move through the kitchen with the same economy and care she brought to everything, and watched her hand a plate to the oldest Weller child, with the particular gentleness she used with people who needed to be treated gently without being told they did. Sarah Weller looked at Amelia across the table and said, "How did you know to keep those records for 14 months alone out here? How did you know they'd matter?" Amelia sat down with her own plate and looked at Sarah Weller, a woman who had her own hard months in her eyes, her own version of building something and almost losing it and getting it back scarred but intact. "I didn't know," Amelia said. "I just knew that if something was worth doing, it was worth being able to prove you'd done it." She paused. "And this place was worth doing." Sarah Weller nodded slowly, the nod of a woman who understood that kind of thinking from the inside. After dinner, the Wellers stayed for another hour, and the children ran in the yard, the way children ran when they were somewhere they felt safe with the whole body abandoned that could not be performed or manufactured. And Weller talked with Nathaniel about the homestead and what it would take to start again, and Nathaniel told him what he knew, which was practical and honest, and did not minimize the difficulty. When they left, Amelia stood at the gate and watched them ride out. Nathaniel stood beside her. "They're going to be all right," she said. "Yes," he said. "They are." She turned and looked at him. The full look, the one she gave things she was seeing completely and without reservation, and he held it the way he had learned to hold it, which was without flinching and without looking away. "This is what it was for," she said, not asking, just naming it. "Yes," he said. She looked back at the road where the Wellers had gone, and at the valley beyond the gate, and at the land on either side of her that carried both their names. Now on a deed in the document case in the house that neither of them was going to leave. "Then it was worth every single day of it," she said. He reached for her hand. She gave it to him without looking away from the valley, and they stood there together at the gate of the Crowe Ranch as the April evening came down warm and slow over Montana territory, and the spring on the northeast quarter ran on beneath the ground, steady and certain, and entirely unconcerned with anyone who had ever tried to take it, because it had always been exactly where it belonged. And so had she. And so finally had he.